The fluorescent lights of St. Raphael General Hospital hummed above Jessie Martinez as she adjusted the thin blanket over a frail, elderly patient. The ward smelled of antiseptic and fatigue, the kind of sterile coldness that clung to every corner of the hospital. Jessie's hands moved with practiced precision, but her eyes betrayed a softness that the rigid protocols around her could never extinguish. She was 28, already marked by the weary resilience of someone who had seen too much pain dismissed, too many lives treated as numbers on a chart. The badge clipped to her scrub pocket announced "Registered Nurse," but to the patients who whispered gratitude through cracked lips, she was more than that. She was the last bit of humanity left in the steel corridors of St. Raphael. Her shift had stretched into its 12th hour, and the night was only deepening. Monitors beeped with mechanical indifference. Colleagues hurried past her, some muttering, others immersed in charts. The hospital was an efficient machine, built to keep moving, but the gears always ground down those who lacked wealth or coverage. Jessie had long learned that compassion was an inconvenience in this system. Yet, despite warnings from her supervisors, she could never ignore the eyes of those who looked at her as if she were their last chance. She paused at the nurse's station, where Grace Parker, her supervisor, stood reviewing files with the stiffness of authority. Grace's hair was tied into a severe bun, her uniform pressed to perfection, her gaze sharp enough to slice through any attempt at argument. Beside her, the director of medicine, Dr. Henry Smith, was speaking in clipped tones to a junior doctor about bed availability. Jessie knew both of them had little patience for her tendencies. Too much time with patients, too much empathy, too many unnecessary interventions. She had heard the word idealistic used about her in board meetings. At St. Raphael, that word meant reckless. The double doors at the end of the corridor burst open with the crash of a gurney wheeled at reckless speed. Two paramedics shouted for assistance, their uniforms damp with rain from the storm raging outside. The patient on the stretcher was young, barely past his 20s, his face bloodied and pale, his chest rising with uneven effort. The sheet beneath him was soaked through with crimson, and the metallic scent of fresh blood filled the air. Jessie rushed forward instinctively, even as Grace barked at her to wait for triage. But the boy's hand twitched weakly, his lips parting in a soundless gasp, and Jessie's heart clenched at the unmistakable sight of life slipping away. Unidentified male, found unconscious near the riverbank, one of the paramedics reported. No ID, no insurance card. He was half drowned, severe head trauma, possible internal bleeding. Grace's mouth tightened as she exchanged a glance with Dr. Smith. Stabilize him and transfer to county. We don't have the resources to handle indigent cases at this level. Jessie froze, staring at them as the words echoed through her. Indigent. The word was a death sentence here. She knew exactly what that meant. Temporary measures, minimal effort, enough to claim they had tried, but never enough to truly save. The boy would be patched just enough to survive the ambulance ride, then likely lost in the overcrowded chaos of the public system. He was dying now, seconds, minutes at most, and no transfer would reach him in time. Her training screamed at her to act, and so did her conscience. She looked at the jagged wound on his scalp, the swelling that hinted at intracranial pressure building dangerously. If nothing was done, he would be brain dead before dawn. Jessie pressed her gloved hand to the bleeding, applying pressure, feeling the fragility of the pulse beneath. He won't make it through the transfer, she said, her voice trembling but firm. We need to operate now. Dr. Smith's expression hardened into something cold and clinical. You will stabilize, nurse. That is all. Do not overstep your role. Grace stepped closer, her voice low but laced with warning. Jessie, do not make this mistake again. You are not authorized to proceed. Do what you're told. The young man's chest hitched in a weak spasm, and Jessie's resolve crystallized. Around her, the hospital felt like a machine running on autopilot, blind to the human being bleeding out in front of them. She thought of all the nights she had gone home with guilt heavy in her chest, wondering if she could have done more. Tonight, she could. Tonight, she would. Her hands moved with sudden determination. Get me neuro on call, she demanded, already reaching for supplies. A resident hesitated nearby, torn between the authority of Dr. Smith and the urgency in Jessie's voice. Now, Jessie snapped, her tone leaving no room for hesitation. The resident picked up the phone. Grace's voice rose, sharp with outrage. Jesse Martinez, you will stop this instant. You are risking your career. Jesse's eyes never left the boy's pale face as she interrupted, her voice steady and fierce. Then fire me. But you will not stop me from saving him. For a breathless moment, silence hung in the air, broken only by the relentless beep of monitors and the storm rattling against the hospital windows. Jesse bent over the patient, already setting up 4 lines, barking orders to whoever dared to assist her. Some nurses stepped back, unwilling to challenge the chain of command. But others, drawn by her conviction, moved hesitantly into place, handing her gauze, preparing blood transfusions, acting as though a battle line had been drawn and they had chosen their side. Dr. Smith's jaw clenched, his fury palpable, but Jessie no longer saw him. The world had narrowed to her, and the boy who clung to life beneath her hands. In that moment, she crossed the invisible line that separated obedience from defiance, safety from sacrifice. She knew there would be consequences. She knew her future here might end tonight. And yet, for the first time in years, Jessie felt absolutely certain she was doing the right thing. The boy's chest rose a little stronger, his pulse steadied under her fingers. Hope flickered like a fragile flame. Jessie leaned closer, whispering almost to herself, "Hold on. I won't let you die." Outside, thunder cracked through the night sky, the storm mirroring the chaos inside St. Raphael. Jessie lifted her eyes to see Dr. Ramirez, the neuro attending, storming into the ward after the frantic call. His gaze swept over the scene, narrowing on Jessie's hands pressing against the young man's wound. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded. Grace pointed accusingly. "This nurse has lost control. She's acting without authorization." But Dr. Ramirez was already pulling on gloves, assessing the patient with clinical speed. His brow furrowed, and then he barked, "Prep thee, or immediately. If we don't relieve this pressure, he won't last an hour." Jessie exhaled in relief, even as Grace gasped in outrage. The decision had been made, and the battle lines drawn deeper. The young man's life was moving toward a fragile chance at survival, but Jessie's was moving toward ruin. And yet, as she followed the gurney toward the operating room, drenched in sweat and adrenaline, Jessie Martinez knew there was no turning back. The doors swung closed behind them, and in the echo of their slam, a single truth burned clear: she had just chosen her fate. The storm lingered over the city long after dawn, its rain dripping like restless fingers against the windows of Jessie's small apartment. She sat on the edge of her bed, her scrubs still rumpled from the night before, her mind replaying the scene in the operating room. The sterile light, the metallic scent of blood, the rapid orders from Dr. Ramirez as they fought to keep the young man alive. It all looped in her memory, a fragile balance of triumph and dread. He had survived the night. That was her victory. Yet beneath the relief, a shadow pressed against her chest. She had disobeyed. She had crossed a line no nurse was supposed to cross. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, a reminder that reality was already closing in. She ignored it, staring at the cracked ceiling as her thoughts wandered back years. Back to why she had chosen this path in the first place. Jessie was 16 when her mother collapsed in their modest kitchen, clutching her chest. The ambulance had taken too long. The hospital had demanded proof of insurance before offering real care, and by the time doctors intervened, her mother's heart had given out. Jessie had been left with grief and an unshakable conviction. No one should be left to die because of bureaucracy or money. That night had defined her. Nursing became more than a profession. It was a vow etched into her very bones. Now, as she replayed her supervisor's words, "You will stop this instant," the anger that had driven her last night still smoldered. If she had stood down, that boy would be dead. How could Grace Parker and Dr. Smith not see that? How could they choose the hospital's finances over a human life? Her phone buzzed again. This time she reached for it. A message from a colleague appeared on the screen. "Grace is furious. Smith is filing a report. They're making an example out of you." Jessie set the phone aside with a shaky breath. The weight of inevitability pressed down on her, but there was also a strange calm beneath it. She had saved him. Whatever else came, she had saved him. Meanwhile, back in St. Raphael's ICU, the young man lay unconscious, his head bandaged, machines monitoring every beat and breath. His chart identified him only as John Doe, early 20s, no ID, presumed homeless. Yet beneath the hospital gown, his skin was clean, his nails trimmed, his hair, though matted with blood, bore signs of care. Something about him did not fit the narrative. Dr. Ramirez stood at his bedside, reviewing the scans. He had seen countless traumas, but there was something unusual here. The severity of the injuries contrasted with the sheer resilience of the patient's body. The boy was fighting harder than most, as though some invisible force tethered him to life. "You're not done with this world, are you?" Ramirez muttered under his breath. The patient stirred faintly, a flicker of movement that sent a ripple of surprise through the nurse monitoring him. "Doctor," he moved. Ramirez leaned closer, his trained eyes catching the brief twitch of an eyelid. It wasn't consciousness, not yet, but it was a sign. Against the odds, this boy might come back. And if he did, he would carry Jessie Martinez's defiance in every breath he took. Back in her apartment, Jessie pulled her jacket on and prepared to return to the hospital, though she knew walking into St. Raphael now was like walking into a lion's den. Yet she couldn't stay away. Her patient, needed her. And perhaps, just perhaps, she could explain, justify, defend her actions. She didn't yet realize that explanations would not matter. The wheels of retribution had already been set in motion. When she arrived, the tension was palpable. Eyes followed her down the corridor, whispers trailing behind her like shadows. Grace intercepted her near the ICU doors, her posture rigid, her voice clipped. "Jessie, you're suspended pending review. You have no authorization to be here." Jessie's throat tightened, but her eyes burned with quiet fire. "I need to check on the patient." Grace's lips thinned. "That patient is not your concern anymore." Jessie almost spoke back, but she caught sight of the boy through the glass window, his chest rising steadily with each mechanical breath. For one moment, relief surged through her. He was alive. That was enough. She turned without another word, walking past Grace as though the corridor itself were a gauntlet she refused to bow to. Behind her, Grace whispered to an aide, "Make sure security escorts her out." Jessie kept her head high, but inside her heart cracked. The storm was no longer outside. It was inside these walls, gathering strength, waiting to break. The boardroom of St. Raphael General was a place designed for intimidation. Polished mahogany table, leather chairs, walls lined with framed certificates and photographs of donors who had paid for entire wings of the hospital. It was not a place for nurses, and certainly not for Jessie Martinez. Yet here she stood, summoned like a defendant to trial. Dr. Henry Smith sat at the head of the table, his hands steepled, his face carved in stone. Beside him, Grace Parker maintained her icy composure, a silent executioner waiting for the signal. Other administrators filled the seats, some watching with detached interest, others already scribbling notes for what they knew would become a disciplinary record. Jessie's palms were damp, but she refused to let them see her fear. "I did what needed to be done," she said before anyone could speak. "That patient would have died if I hadn't intervened." Smith leaned back, his voice carrying the weight of authority sharpened by disdain. "You disobeyed direct orders. You exposed this hospital to liability. Do you have any idea what the cost of unauthorized surgery is? The equipment, the staff hours, the blood reserves? $350,000. That's the bill for your recklessness." The number hit Jessie like a physical blow, but she didn't flinch. "And what's the cost of a human life, doctor? What figure do you assign to that?" A murmur spread around the table, some shifting uncomfortably, others smirking at what they saw as naivety. Grace cut in sharply. "You're a nurse, not a savior. You don't get to decide policy." Jessie's voice trembled, but not from fear, from fury. If saving lives isn't the policy of this hospital, then maybe it shouldn't exist. The words hung heavy in the air. Smith's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing into slits. "Consider this your termination notice. You're relieved of all duties effective immediately. And be advised, the hospital will be pursuing legal action against you for damages. You will answer for this in court." Jessie felt her knees weaken, but she held her ground. She would not let them see her break. "Then I'll answer, but I will never regret what I did." Security arrived moments later, escorting her out like a criminal. As she walked through the lobby, patients and staff turned to stare. To them, she was already guilty, branded by the whispers that followed her. Reckless, foolish, finished. She stepped out into the rain, her world collapsing around her, yet clinging to one fragile truth. He was alive. That boy, whoever he was still breathing because she had refused to let him go. And deep inside the ICU, under layers of bandages and sedation, Hugo Fabry stirred again. His body fought. His mind clawed through the darkness. The name buried inside him pulsed like a heartbeat, though no one around him recognized it yet. When his eyes finally opened, confusion clouded them, but a single word pressed against his lips, a word no one understood in that sterile room. Jesse. The storm outside broke into sunlight, but for Jesse Martinez, the true tempest was only beginning. The early morning sun slanted across St. Raphael General, glinting off the glass panels of the ICU as though trying to pierce the gloom within. Jesse, now officially barred from hospital grounds, sat at the window of a small cafe across the street, staring at the building with a hollow ache in her chest. She felt like an exile, banished from the place that had been both battlefield and sanctuary for the past 6 years of her life. Each time she glanced up, she wondered if the boy, her boy, the one she had fought for, was still breathing. The waitress set down her untouched coffee and whispered, "Rough morning." Jesse forced a tight smile and nodded. She didn't have the strength to explain. Inside the hospital, Hugo Fabry's eyelids flickered again. The world was fractured light and muffled sound, like echoes in a tunnel. He tried to lift his hand, but tubes anchored him, machines breathed for him. His throat burned, his head throbbed, and fragments of memory crashed like broken glass. Sirens, water, darkness. But through it all, one face emerged from the fog. A woman's face, dark eyes filled with fire, hands steady despite the chaos. Jesse. He didn't know her, yet she felt like the tether keeping him alive. When he stirred again, nurses rushed to page Dr. Ramirez. Within minutes, the neurosurgeon leaned over him, his sharp features softening with surprise. "Well, John Doe," Ramirez murmured, "seems you're not done with us yet." Hugo tried to speak, but only a rasp escaped. Ramirez reassured him gently. "Save your strength. We'll have answers soon." But Hugo wanted answers now. He wanted to know where the nurse was, the one who refused to let him die. He blinked slowly, forming the word with cracked lips. "Jesse." The nurse on duty frowned. "Who?" Meanwhile, Jessie sat in the cafe until her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a warning from a colleague, but a message from an unknown number. "The patient is asking for you." Her heart jolted. She didn't know who had sent it, but the implication burned bright. Against every order, against every punishment already stacked against her, she belonged in that room. Back in the boardroom, Dr. Smith reviewed damage control strategies with Grace Parker. The lawsuit papers against Jesse were already being prepared. "We cannot let one nurse undermine this institution," Smith growled. "If word spreads that we bow to sentimental impulses, our donors will abandon us." Grace nodded, though unease flickered in her eyes. For the first time, she wondered if their obsession with control had gone too far. The unexpected twist came not from Jesse, nor from Smith, but from the unconscious boy himself. Security footage from the night of his arrival had finally been reviewed in detail. A paramedic noticed something odd: a tattoo on the patient's shoulder, a crest faintly visible through the blood. It matched a symbol known to very few outside the circles of power, the family seal of the Fabry dynasty. The name whispered through the administrative offices like a shockwave. Fabry. Auguste Fabry, the magnate whose empire touched everything from real estate to media to pharmaceuticals. A man so powerful that senators sought his approval before running for office. And here, in their ICU, lay a young man bearing his seal. Dr. Smith paled when he realized the implications. If the boy was truly a Fabry, their mishandling of his case could end more than reputations. It could end careers, maybe the hospital itself. He ordered the footage sealed, the nurses sworn to silence. But rumors had already begun to spread. Hugo, still drifting in and out of consciousness, had no idea of the storm his identity was stirring. All he wanted was to see Jessie again, to know she was safe. His whisper of her name reached ears that pretended not to hear. But fate was moving faster than secrecy, and soon the world would know the truth. The so-called indigent was no ordinary man. Outside the hospital, Jessie lifted her eyes from her cold coffee and felt the stirrings of something she couldn't explain. As if the tides themselves were shifting. as if saving that young man had set in motion forces larger than anything she had ever imagined. Jessie's apartment was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that gnawed at the edges of her resolve. Bills were stacked on the counter, each one more urgent than the last, reminders of how fragile her life had become in just days. Without her job, her savings would vanish quickly. Without her license, her future as a nurse would end before it truly began. Yet none of that haunted her as much as the thought of the boy in the hospital bed, alone, wondering if she had abandoned him. That evening, a knock at her door startled her. When she opened it, she found a young nurse from St. Raphael, Evelyn, her former trainee, standing nervously with a file tucked under her coat. "He keeps asking for you," Evelyn whispered. "The John Doe. He woke up today. He said your name." Jessie's heart thudded. "How do you know?" "I was on shift. Dr. Ramirez heard it too. They're trying to keep it quiet, but I thought you should know." Evelyn hesitated, then pulled a folded paper from her pocket. "And this, it was found with him. They said it was meaningless, but look." Jessie unfolded the note, a water-stained scrap with an embossed crest faintly visible, a lion entwined with vines. She didn't recognize it, but the weight of it felt important. "What is it? Some kind of seal?" Evelyn said. "They're hiding it, Jessie. Something's going on." Meanwhile, inside the hospital, divisions grew. Some nurses whispered admiration for Jessie, calling her a hero who had dared to put humanity before profit. Others sided with Grace and Smith, insisting she was reckless, dangerous, a liability who had endangered them all. The staff cafeteria buzzed with debates that ended in sharp words and slammed trays. The hospital had never felt more fractured. Dr. Ramirez, for his part, found himself caught in the middle. He admired Jessie's courage and knew she had been right about the boy's condition. Yet aligning with her meant risking his career. Still, when Hugo's eyes opened again, searching the room with desperate confusion, Ramirez leaned close and asked, "Who do you want me to call?" Hugo's lips formed the word again. "Jessie." Ramirez sighed. "She's not here. She's gone from this hospital." Hugo's eyes flashed with something fierce, a spark of defiance that reminded Ramirez of Jessie herself. His voice, hoarse but determined, rasped out, "Bring her back." It was not a request. It was a command, and for reasons he couldn't explain, Ramirez felt compelled to obey. Back at her apartment, Jessie stared at the crest in her hands, her mind racing with unanswered questions. Who was this boy? Why did he have a seal like this? Why was the hospital hiding it? She didn't know yet that the answers would shatter everything she thought she knew, not just about him, but about the entire system she had spent her life serving. The night deepened, and with it came the sense of inevitability. The alliances were forming, the lines being drawn. Jessie was not yet back inside St. Raphael, but her presence was everywhere, in the whispers of nurses, in the conscience of Ramirez, in the desperate demands of Hugo Fabry. And in the boardroom, Grace and Smith tightened their grip, determined to crush her once and for all, blind to the storm building just beyond their reach. The ICU was dim, the steady rhythm of machines filling the silence. Hugo lay against the white sheets, his body bruised but alive, his mind finally pushing through the haze of sedation. The name, Jessie, remained on his lips like a prayer, though the staff avoided acknowledging it. To them, she was a problem erased from the hospital's records, a cautionary tale whispered among nurses. To Hugo, she was the reason his heart still beat. Dr. Ramirez entered quietly, chart in hand, his sharp eyes catching Hugo's restless shifting. "You're stronger than most," he muttered, "but you need rest." Hugo ignored the advice. His throat ached as he forced the words out. "The nurse." "Jessie." Ramirez hesitated, then leaned closer. "She's not here. They dismissed her. She broke the rules to save you." The information struck Hugo like lightning. He closed his eyes, memories flooding back. The riverbank, the attack, the hands pulling him out of the water. Then nothing until the night her face had appeared above him. He couldn't explain why, but he trusted her more than anyone. She had risked everything for him, and now she was paying the price. "Bring her," Hugo rasped. "I need her." Ramirez studied him for a long moment. The boy's features, now clearer with the swelling reduced, were strikingly familiar, though Ramirez couldn't place them. "Why her?" Hugo's reply was hoarse but resolute. "Because she chose me when no one else would." Meanwhile, Jessie sat in her dim apartment, The crest Evelyn had given her spread out on the table. She traced the faint lines with her finger, a strange unease creeping over her. It wasn't just a decorative seal, it had weight, significance. She opened her old laptop and searched tirelessly until images flickered on her screen. Articles about Auguste Fabry, America's most powerful industrialist. And there it was, unmistakable. The same lion entwined with vines carved into his corporate insignia, emblazoned on glass towers and stock certificates. Jesse's breath caught. The boy in that bed was no ordinary John Doe. He was connected to one of the wealthiest families in the country. But why had he been found near a riverbank, half dead, dressed like someone with nothing? Why was the hospital trying to bury the truth? Her thoughts spiraled, each question heavier than the last. And then, in a flash, her phone vibrated. Unknown number again. He wants you. Room 412. Come tonight. Fear knotted in her stomach. Was it a trap? A chance? She couldn't know. But she also couldn't ignore it. She pulled her jacket tight, the city's night air biting her skin as she crossed toward the hospital she no longer belonged to. Inside, tension simmered. Nurses divided into camps. Those who whispered admiration for Jesse's defiance, and those who echoed Grace's cold authority. Dr. Smith worked feverishly to suppress the leak of information about John Doe's identity, knowing full well that if the Fabry name attached itself to their neglect, they would all face ruin. That night, Jessie slipped through the side entrance, her heart pounding like a drum. Evelyn guided her up the back stairs, past security, past questioning eyes. The ICU door loomed ahead. When Jessie stepped inside, Hugo's gaze locked onto her instantly. His eyes, still hazy, but burning with recognition, softened in relief. You, he whispered, his voice raw. You saved me. Jessie's throat tightened, emotions surging through her. She stepped closer, unable to stop herself. I couldn't let you die. For a moment, nothing else existed. The machines, the danger, the world outside. Just the bond of two souls tethered by a choice made in defiance of everything. But even in that fragile moment, Jessie knew the truth. Secrets were unraveling, and soon the world would descend on both of them. The hospital tried to keep its walls sealed, but cracks were spreading. And through those cracks, the truth would come flooding. The next morning, the storm finally broke, not outside, but within the walls of St. Raphael. A journalist from a small local paper had caught wind of whispers about a mysterious patient, a near drowning with no name. The article was brief, speculative, but it was enough. The story spread like wildfire, amplified by online chatter. Who was this John Doe, and why was the hospital guarding his identity so fiercely? Dr. Smith slammed the article onto the boardroom table, fury etched into every line of his face. This is what happens when we don't contain leaks. If the family catches wind. He cut himself off, glancing at Grace, who was equally pale. Both knew that once the name Fabry surfaced, the hospital's carefully built facade would crumble. Meanwhile, Jessie walked home from her forbidden visit to Hugo, her chest still aching from the way he had looked at her. Gratitude, recognition, a strange, unspoken bond. She had sworn to herself she would never regret saving him, no matter the cost. But she hadn't expected this. Being pulled deeper into something larger than life, larger than herself. At St. Raphael, Hugo fought through the fog of recovery, demanding to see Jessie again. Ramirez stood at his bedside, torn. You don't understand, boy. She's not welcome here. They're tearing her apart. Then stop them, Hugo snapped, his voice gaining strength. Or I will. Ramirez paused, finally voicing the thought that had gnawed at him for days. Who are you, really? Hugo's lips pressed together. He wasn't ready to reveal it, not yet. He had walked away from that life 2 years ago, abandoning wealth, privilege, and his father's suffocating empire. He had wanted to disappear, to find meaning beyond money. But fate had dragged him back, and Jessie had been the one to hold him in the balance. He owed her truth, but not here, not yet. Later that day, Jessie returned to the cafe, only to find Evelyn waiting nervously with a folded newspaper. You need to see this. She laid it on the table. The headline blazed, Who is the mysterious patient at St. Raphael? Jessie's blood ran cold. The world was circling. Secrets were spilling faster than anyone could stop them. That night, Hugo's resolve hardened. As the machines hummed and the shadows deepened, he reached for the phone at his bedside. His hands trembled, but determination steadied him. He dialed a number he hadn't touched in 2 years. When the line clicked and a deep, commanding voice answered, Hugo whispered, "It's me, Father." A silence followed, thick and weighted. Then Auguste Fabry's voice thundered across the line, filled with shock, fury, and something unspoken. "Hugo? Where are you?" The point of no return had been crossed. Jessie didn't know it yet, but her act of compassion had just entangled her in a war that would shake the foundations of power itself. The call to Auguste Fabry reverberated like a gunshot through Hugo's quiet hospital room. He hadn't heard his father's voice in years, not since he had stormed out of the Fabry estate in defiance, choosing exile over chains of privilege. Yet in that moment, his rebellion crumbled beneath the weight of reality. Jessie's face, her sacrifice, her exile from the hospital. She had done what no one else in Hugo's gilded life had ever done. She had chosen him not for his name, not for his wealth, but for his humanity. And now she was paying the price. Auguste Fabry did not waste time. Within hours of the call, his private lawyers and a small army of security advisors descended upon St. Raphael. Their presence was like a thundercloud over the pristine halls, their tailored suits and clipped voices announcing authority that no one dared challenge. Rumors spread among the staff faster than truth. The boy wasn't just wealthy. He was the Hugo Fabry, heir to an empire worth billions. Grace Parker's carefully composed facade cracked for the first time when she saw the delegation enter the hospital boardroom. She whispered to Dr. Smith, "If this gets out, we're finished." Smith's reply was a hissed command. "We contain it. Deny everything. Do not let them tie us to that nurse." But containment was impossible now. The staff who had once whispered Jessie's name in fear now whispered it with awe. The nurse who had been thrown out for saving a patient had unknowingly saved the heir to America's most powerful dynasty. Every act of cruelty the administration had inflicted on her was now a liability, a scandal waiting to erupt. Jessie, however, remained in her cramped apartment, unaware of how quickly the storm had grown. She stared at the mounting bills. The eviction notice slipped under her door, her dreams crumbling into dust. She had no idea that her name was already on the lips of billionaires and board members. To her, she was just a disgraced nurse who had lost everything. That evening, Evelyn returned, her eyes wide with news. He called his father. "Auguste Fabry is here. Jessie, he's demanding to see you." Jessie's breath caught. "What? What?" "Because you saved his son. And now the hospital is panicking. They're trying to erase everything you did, but Hugo won't let them." Jessie's hands trembled as she sank into a chair. She wanted to believe it, but it sounded impossible, like something out of a story too wild to be real. Yet the crest she had traced on that scrap of paper, the intensity in Hugo's eyes, the way he had spoken her name, it all clicked into place. Meanwhile, within the Fabry estate, Auguste himself raged. When Hugo's location and condition were revealed, fury eclipsed every other emotion. His son, presumed lost for 2 years, nearly died in a hospital that had tried to discard him like refuse. For Auguste, it wasn't just about Hugo's survival. It was about humiliation. St. Raphael had dared to risk the life of his heir. And worse, they had destroyed the woman who had saved him. For the first time in his empire-building life, Auguste Fabry's vengeance aligned with justice. At St. Raphael, consequences rippled outward. Donors began to pull calls of inquiry. Media vans circled the block, and staff whispered in corners, afraid of being caught on the wrong side. The hospital's iron control fractured under the weight of scandal. Jessie's decision, one act of defiance, had detonated a bomb that no one could contain. And in the quiet of his hospital bed, Hugo smiled faintly through his pain. "Hold on, Jessie," he whispered. "They can't bury the truth anymore." The morning after Auguste Fabry arrived in the city, St. Raphael General was unrecognizable. Black SUVs lined the street, reporters swarmed the sidewalks, and staff moved like nervous shadows under the glare of scrutiny. The boardroom, once a sanctuary of untouchable authority, now felt like a courtroom with every word weighed against potential ruin. Dr. Smith tried to maintain control, presenting his calmest facade to Auguste Fabry himself, who sat at the head of the table with his lawyers flanking him. The man radiated power, his voice sharp as steel. "My son lay in your ICU, near death, labeled indigent. Tell me, doctor, What protocols allow you to discard a human life so casually? Smith swallowed hard. We acted within standard medical policy. Policy? August cut him off. You tried to throw my son away like trash because he didn't come wrapped in insurance paperwork. If not for one nurse, he would be dead. And how did you repay her? You destroyed her. Grace Parker shifted uncomfortably, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She acted recklessly. She endangered the hospital. She saved my son. August snapped, his voice reverberating through the room. And if this institution has any future left, it owes that future to her. The buried truths spilled quickly now. Records Jessie had signed, warnings she had received, all twisted to paint her as disobedient. It all unraveled under the scrutiny of August's legal team. Emails showed Grace dismissing patients as non-priority. Notes revealed Smith's obsession with profit over care. What had been whispered in break rooms and hidden behind locked doors now flooded into daylight. Meanwhile, Jessie remained in her apartment, unaware that her name was being spoken in headlines across the nation. She was the nurse who had saved the air, the martyr who had been fired for doing the right thing. Her shame was transforming into legend, though she still sat in shadows, clutching her eviction notice, certain she had lost everything. Late that evening, there was a knock at her door. She opened it cautiously and froze. Standing there, pale but alive, was Hugo Fabry himself. His suit was rumpled, his posture unsteady, but his eyes burned with fierce determination. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. Jessie couldn't find words. The boy she had pulled back from death was no longer anonymous, no longer a nameless John Doe. He was Hugo Fabry, heir to the most powerful man in the country, and yet he looked at her with gratitude, not superiority. You saved me, he said softly, and I won't let them destroy you for it. Jessie's throat tightened. You shouldn't be here. You need rest, and if they find out, they already know everything. Hugo interrupted. And now the world will too. But before anything else, I needed to see you. To tell you the truth myself. Jessie stepped back, allowing him inside. For the first time, she felt the weight of the buried truths rising to the surface. Truths that would change not only her life, but the future of every patient who walked into St. Raphael. The storm that had begun with a single act of defiance was now a reckoning, and there was no going back. The Fabry estate's private conference room was nothing like the sterile boardrooms of St. Raphael. Dark wood walls, oil paintings of ancestors, and the faint scent of leather and tobacco created an atmosphere of permanence, of power that spanned generations. Jessie sat uneasily at the far end of the long table, her hands folded in her lap, feeling impossibly small in this empire of wealth. She hadn't wanted to be here, hadn't wanted to sit across from lawyers and strategists who looked at her as though she were both savior and liability. But Hugo had insisted. Jessie deserves to hear everything, he had said, silencing the murmurs of objection. His eyes had burned with defiance, his voice steady, even though his body still carried the weakness of recovery. And so Jessie stayed. August Fabry entered last, his presence filling the room like thunder. He studied Jessie for a long moment before taking his seat. His gaze was sharp, weighing her silently, and Jessie felt the weight of centuries pressing down on her shoulders. This was a man who was not used to being challenged, not used to vulnerability. Yet she had saved his son when all his money and power could not. You risked your life and your career for Hugo, August said finally, his deep voice steady. That is something I cannot ignore. Jessie swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because he was dying. Because no one else would. August inclined his head, and for the first time, Jessie saw something soften in his features. And that is why this battle will not end with saving one life. We will tear apart the system that allowed this. The lawyers outlined their strategy. A lawsuit against St. Raphael for wrongful termination, negligence, and corruption. Public exposure of Smith and Grace's policies. A media campaign to shift public opinion. But Hugo interrupted, his voice hoarse but resolute. No, he said. This isn't just about punishing them. This is about changing everything. If we fight only for Jessie, we win a battle. If we fight for every patient they've abandoned, we win a war. Jessie turned to him, startled by the fire in his tone. This was no longer the disheveled boy she had pulled from death's edge. This was a man reclaiming his purpose. And August, for all his cold pragmatism, sat back with a faint smile of recognition. His son had returned, not in wealth, but in strength. Outside, the city buzzed with anticipation. News outlets speculated, crowds gathered at the hospital gates, and whispers of reform stirred in political circles. The stage was being set, and Jessie, whether she liked it or not, was at the center. That night, as she lay in the guest room offered to her in the Fabry estate, Jessie stared at the ceiling. She thought of her mother, of all the patients she had lost, of every night she had wondered if compassion had a place in medicine anymore. Tomorrow, she would find out. Tomorrow, the confrontation would decide everything. The boardroom of St. Raphael was unrecognizable when Jessie entered the next morning. Reporters clustered outside, cameras flashing as security struggled to maintain order. Inside, the atmosphere was electric, charged with dread and expectation. Auguste Fabry sat at one end of the table, flanked by his attorneys. Jessie sat beside him, her hands trembling slightly, though she held her chin high. Across from them, Dr. Smith and Grace Parker clung to their composure like drowning men to driftwood. The proceedings began with documents, evidence of deliberate negligence, memos prioritizing financial concerns over patient care, testimonies from staff who had been silenced. Each page was a nail in the coffin of St. Raphael's leadership. Grace's mask cracked as she realized the inevitability of their downfall. But the true climax came not from paper, but from voice. Hugo, pale but resolute, entered the room with Ramirez's steadying arm at his side. Gasps rippled through the administrators as he took his seat. For 2 years, he had been the ghost heir, the scandal of disappearance whispered in tabloids. Now he sat before them, alive, eyes blazing with fury. "You left me to die," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "Not knowing my name, not knowing who I was. You decided I wasn't worth saving." Jessie Martinez thought differently. "She saved me when your policies told her to let me die, and you destroyed her for it." Dr. Smith opened his mouth to protest, but Hugo's voice rose, ironclad. "This hospital will change. Not for me, but for every nameless patient who walked through your doors and was discarded. If you will not change it, then we will." The words reverberated like a verdict. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicked, and Grace's shoulders slumped in defeat. The truth was undeniable. August leaned forward, his voice final. "This institution will not survive in its current form. Either resign and let us rebuild it, or be dismantled in court and in the public eye." Silence hung heavy, broken only by the storm of flashes outside the glass walls. Grace finally lowered her gaze. "We resign," she whispered. In that moment, Jessie felt the air shift. The fight was not over, but the tide had turned. For the first time, the weight pressing on her chest lifted. She had not just saved a life, she had sparked a revolution. Weeks later, St. Raphael General Hospital reopened under a new name, the Jessie Martinez Center for Compassionate Care. The ceremony was broadcast nationwide, a symbol of rebirth and reform. The sterile corridors had been softened with warm colors, family lounges created, patient advocates hired. It was no longer a machine, it was becoming a sanctuary. Jessie stood on the steps outside, her name emblazoned across the building behind her. She still felt like the girl from a small apartment with overdue bills, not someone worthy of such honor. Yet as the crowd applauded, as patients and families cheered, she realized she was no longer just Jessie Martinez, nurse. She had become something larger, a symbol of compassion in a world starved for it. Auguste Fabry addressed the crowd, his booming voice carrying over the microphones. "This center stands as proof that one act of courage can change everything. Jessie Martinez risked everything to save one life. In doing so, she saved us all." And then Hugo stepped forward. He no longer wore the guise of a lost heir. His suit was simple, his expression earnest, his eyes fixed on Jessie. In front of cameras, doctors, and patients, he took her hands. "You gave me back my life," he said, his voice trembling. "And I don't want to waste another second of it without you. Jessie, will you marry me?" The crowd gasped, then erupted in applause. Jessie's heart pounded, tears welling in her eyes. For a moment, the weight of all she had endured, the humiliation, the loss, the fear, melted into a single truth. She had chosen compassion, and it had brought her here, to this man, to this moment, to a future she could never have imagined. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking but certain. Yes. Hugo pulled her into his arms, the world erupting around them, and Jessie realized her story had come full circle. She had once been a nurse dismissed as reckless. Now she stood as the embodiment of hope. And with Hugo by her side, and August's empire fueling change, the system itself would bend toward humanity. Her decision to save one life had rewritten the destiny of thousands. The storm had passed, and a new horizon stretched wide before her. If you made it this far, leave us a comment telling us where you're watching from today and what you thought of the story. If you can, share this video with your friends and family, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to receive new videos. A big hug, and see you tomorrow.